The Rap Guide to Evolution. Obviously a good idea. First he did the Rap Guide to the Canterbury Tales. Perhaps less obviously a good idea, but still a good idea. Imagine the challenges of taking all this science we've heard, all this philosophy, and trying to turn it into a super fast talking musical medium to communicate to the masses of the world. Here it is. Are we almost ready? Baba Brinkman.
The first man on this planet to translate his amazement, that was the cue for the sound right there. Yeah, track one. The first man on this planet to translate his amazement at the wonder of life into a way to explain it was Charles Darwin. So this is a celebration of Darwin's greatness in the form of a rap. Some would say a debasement. I would say be patient. Okay, so how do you go from amoebas to rappers? You open the origin of species and you read its chapters. You're going to learn all about the impact of people's actions on farm animals, ducks, cows, dogs, domestic crops. They had wild ancestors, but somehow they went soft. Kind of like underground rappers going pop. Like for instance, in West Africa around 7000 BC, humans first domesticated black-eyed peas. But don't call it sellout, please. Those black-eyed peas have a lot of mouths to feed. Their wild cousins, well, they just watch from the weeds. See, there is nothing artificial about domestication. Ant colonies keep domestic aphids. It's an arrangement where one hand watches the other. We protect the cow, and the cow offers the udder. And that's how we get a mouthful of butter. But in the wild, that cow is not going to cut it. But think about it for a second. If our little selections and little preferences can change and enhance all the critical differences between wild and domestic breeds over the centuries, well, maybe that can explain everything. In nature, instead of us making selections, it's just survival and reproduction in the midst of competition, where slight differences that arise randomly get selected by the pressures applied environmentally, and eventually species divide like a family tree into everything alive, from a tiny fly to a huge manatee to humanity. So how does this apply to the craft of the MC? Well, they say evolution is an algorithm. It's like an equation. It only has 3 parts: variation, selection, and heritability. So let's see if we can find all 3 in that ecosystem called rap music. Alright, variation can be found obviously in the styles on display. I mean, rappers all have different techniques when they're on stage, and the results can be seen in the audience's face. Like for instance, at this moment, you guys all look amazed. Like guppies removed abruptly from their aquatic space. Your minds are probably racing over questions of style and race and genre and time and place, and some of your eyes are glazed like, for God's sake, how long will this take? But if you all feel that way, soon I'll be replaced by someone more entertaining, like maybe Lil Wayne. See, that's selection. Then again, if people like you plant my seed, you might turn me into a black-eyed pea. See, you're like ancient breeders. You're rearranging the features of a species of sheep. You're increasing the sweetness of your peaches every season whenever you choose to seed it or to feed it or to breed it or to weed it out and delete it because you just don't see it as needed. I mean, the preferences in question could be for bigger chicken breasts or whippets with a thinner midsection, or it could just be an inner predilection to pick the best in any mixed collection. That's artificial selection. You're a farmer. That's how it is. You can't opt out of it. You have no choice but to make choices. You're helpless. It's because your time itself is limited. You're not selfish. It's just the rap version of the doctrine of Malthus. It goes, too many MCs, not enough mics. See, that's the proportion of hungry mouths. Hungry mouths are like the too many MCs compared to food resources in the form of captive audiences. that's the not enough mics. Because crowds of 2 or more will always be at least half as common as performers, right? I mean, there's too many MCs. Can you guys see the mathematical problem? It creates a little bit of a shortage, because there's not enough mics. But survival on stage is a non-random process, because those who get massive responses, well, they tend to influence those who aspire to get massive responses. So if you say I sound like an Eminem ripoff, then I'll probably get pissed off and start grabbing my crotch and acting obnoxious and screaming, "Fuck that dog, that's preposterous." So maybe what you're watching is like a form of imitation modified by experience, which is a pretty similar concept to the genetic basis of inheritance, heritability, except it's part Darwinism and part Lamarckism, with genes and culture co-evolving as we rock to the rhythm. But whether you think cultures really evolved, or if it's just a silly metaphor that's pretty but false, or whether you've never even thought about that, I still think Darwin can teach us all about rap. It teaches us all about that competition for status with intricate language delivered in battles, and it's all about getting that fitness advantage and the different adaptive behavior patterns that have us acting crazier than pheasants mating dances. But hey, that's natural selection. So just sit back and listen, and you'll witness the evolution of the rap profession. So I got it on hand. Interesting challenge. This was presented to me by a scientist, Dr. Mark Palin. He's at Birmingham University in the UK. He heard I rapped about unusual things, and he asked me if I could write some rap songs about Darwin for the bicentennial a couple of years ago. And what you're witnessing now is the result of that process. So how do you connect the two? Well, one thing, evolutionary biologists and rappers can't stop talking about sex. So as you can imagine, this stuff is pretty fun to write. I just want to talk a little bit about Darwin's theory of sexual selection and how it could apply to rap to get self-referential for a second. And this is the idea that, that many traits evolve because they help with the reproductive instead of the survival capabilities of organisms. The classic example, of course, the peacock's tail. The more spots, more densely contained within the tail, the brighter, the more attractive to the female, the more the genes get passed on. But then there's the liability. The bigger and brighter the tail, the more conspicuous for the predators that are hunting peacocks, and the heavier it is to carry as they try to escape. What's interesting now with the Zahavi contribution is that they now think the tail actually evolves because of the burden instead of just in spite of the burden. It's very counterintuitive, but it's called costly signaling theory. And the idea is that the tail contains information about the genetic quality of the male. It's like a signal to the females. It's a message, an honest signal of his strength. So here's the message encoded in the feathers. It says, "You can trust me, baby. You know I gotta be a really strong, real fit, real well put together male, right? I have to be, because if I wasn't, I couldn't afford to carry this big stupid-looking tail around everywhere, could I? I would totally be dead by now. So mate with me." Which is why peacock's tails are actually an identical phenomenon to bling. Don't fall for the temptation to think this is just a metaphor. I'm actually arguing that bling and peacock's tails are actually identical, because what they both are is conspicuous displays of massive waste that are meant to signal surplus resources. Now, there is a slight difference, because in the bird's case, those are genetic resources, and in the gangster rapper or Birdman's case, those are financial resources. But I'm pretty sure those financial resources are meant to signal an underlying genetic message. Because a platinum chain isn't just a platinum chain. It's a special kind of wealth. It tells a story. Here's the message encoded in the diamonds. It says, "You know how I got this wealth? My fucking daddy didn't buy it for me. I had to fight for it. I started from nothing. From absolute poverty, I worked my way up to this. You know how I did it? Using nothing but my natural talent, ingenuity, drive, creativity. And you see how I still got this wealth? Check it out. It's hanging here, all conspicuous, so anybody can see it. It's not in my fucking safe. That means you know I got the strength, I got the cunning, and I got the coalition backing me up to make sure nobody could ever step to me and try to snatch the shit off my neck. So mate with me." The logic, I tell you, is identical. So what we got here is a conspicuous display of a survival liability that leads to a reproductive benefit. Sometimes the reproductive benefits, the liability costs of those can be extreme. So this is the Australian redback spider, and in the redbacks, the females have evolved to be dozens of times larger than the males, and they only have one sex position, and it's not missionary. It's where the female seizes the tiny male, sinks her fangs into him, and starts to devour him for lunch, and the male quickly tries to deposit his sperm before he gets sucked down the hatch and consumed. Now, sometimes the males succeed in slipping it in, and sometimes they fail, and they're just lunch, but either way, no redback male ever mates without being cannibalized by the female he's impregnated. Whoa. Good thing we didn't go down that path of evolution, right, fellas? But why didn't we? I mean, is there an actual reason? That's evolution approves, right? That's a perfectly stable mating strategy for an entire species. It's the only way they reproduce. Would it really not work for us? Or do we just wish it wouldn't work for us because half of us wouldn't like it very much? I mean, maybe it was a flip of the coin in the branching tree of evolution that left redbacks with those cannibalistic, blood-soaked sex lives and left us with these warm, fuzzy primate sex lives where we go and hold hands at movies or weird evolutionary sex conferences at NYU, shit like that. But I'm telling you, if our sex lives were like the sex lives of redback spiders, and evolutionarily they could have been, then in that world, that's exactly what our religions would describe as moral behavior. And that's exactly what our poetry and our pop music would describe as romantic behavior. And all you would hear on the radio all day long would be, "She refuses to eat me, cry me a river." But as soon as a pop star got one groupie, he'd be dead. See? Charles Darwin saw natural selection. Can we get that level down just a bit? Not sexual selection, but natural selection is the most serious cause of evolution. But what was going on with bird songs and peacocks? They follow mysterious laws. But then Darwin had a curious thought. It probably occurred to him while he was trying to explain his theory to a young Victorian blonde whose face displayed a mixture of desire and feverish awe, the immediate cause of which Darwin clearly saw. Like, yeah. So he said, "My dear, descent with modification comes from the struggle for survival and for reproduction. Hence, the reason for some structures must indeed be seduction." What's up? In fact, Darwin's brain was probably one such structure. Just as peacock's tails show off the genes of the top males, and likewise the fighting skills of nightingales, or the songs of nightingales, the fighting skills of elephant seals, and also minnows with colorful scales. See, those are all traits that sexual selection has demonstrably shaped through the female preference to get with the fittest mates. But in the case of human brains, that selection goes both ways. It goes male to female, also goes female to male. See, pretty much anything in nature that is just for display, just for showing off, and isn't meant to evade or chase predators away like danger colors or camouflage, it must have been selected for in a sexual way. Anything in nature that is just for display and has no survival value was probably selected for in a sexual way. But wait, wouldn't that mean that this is just such a display? Like what I'm doing right now on stage? Look, I really thought I came here with something to say. The biologists are telling me that what? This is all just a demonstration of my DNA? So disempowering. So what if it is? That's great. What's to explain? How am I doing, ladies? Can I get a modest empirical evidence? But I wasn't finished anyway. What's to explain? Okay, yes, perhaps a couple of things. First, when I say that something ornate, like human language, originally evolved as some kind of seductive display, I am not arguing that people only use it just to get laid. Darwin leaves Freud in the dustbin, okay? Proximate versus ultimate. Something that evolved for one purpose in the past can be used for a different purpose today. Like, for instance, I could use a urine stream to put out fire. That doesn't mean the penis evolved as a bush firefighter, right? This is a theory of language function, of where language comes from. What we use it for now, separate discussion. So which was it? Was complex language originally a mechanism of survival or reproduction? I mean, it has to have been one of them, right? I'm talking about complex language, not simple language like, "Ooh, look, snake, don't step." Complex language. How would complex language possibly help a person to survive in the Stone Age? Can you talk a predator out of attacking? Can you talk a parasite out of infecting? Can you talk a potential mate into consenting? Potentially. Hence, presenting the grand unified theory of rhyme. Where does rhyme come from? I'm talking about Homer, Beowulf, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Alexander Pope, Eminem, and Jay-Z. It's all the same. Go like this. The meaning mind uses lyrical science combined with wit and wordplay and conversation and humor and different narrative styles to appraise the fitness of mates, both for the purpose of marriage ties and also for mates of the more temporary kind. See, these are the humble roots of the literary sublime. We human beings, we are all just Shakespearean primates verbalizing our cherry behinds. But how can we possibly test this theory of mine? Not just mine, also Jeffrey Miller's. To test it, what we would need would be experimental holding zoos filled with human subjects. For instance, we could use this room, and with an overhead view, we could observe which breeding pairs reproduce and how often they use their verbal ornaments to seduce. We could even separate everybody into control groups so that we could find out for sure whether it's the male or the female vocals that are more prone to be used in the stimulation of hormones, although it's true that this sort of experiment on humans isn't normally approved outside of nightclubs. If only there existed in a state of nature some cultural group that was preoccupied with making paper, trading half-naked women, shaking their moneymakers in front of competitive males, displaying mating behavior while trading your creativity for sexual favors. Can anyone think of an example? Or like a dozen examples? See, if such a group existed, then I predict it would be a major player in the entertainment industry and would be in major danger of being overwhelmed by angry player haters. But I may have to save some of my research for later. And here's the real question. How do I answer the charge that I'm participating in this mating dance myself right now with these dazzling bars? Well, that isn't hard. I plead guilty. See, I worked hard to achieve this ability, and if it also gives my genes visibility for females, then I say so be it. But I confess, it also reveals my unique disability. See, my tendency to tell these monkey fables, it generally fails to attract any nubile young females. It does attract women a lot, though. It just seems like they're all highly educated and post-menopausal. I know. Isn't it awful? I get mobbed after all my shows by these hordes of grandmas who all thank me for making it possible for them to finally appreciate a hip-hop flow. And, you might ask, where are their granddaughters? My guess is they're all at gangster rap concerts. But hey, that's how sexual selection works. Any mutation has to be tested first, and then if it doesn't get spread, well then it's destined to get purged. So this experimental hip-hop mix where it gets crossed with literature and lectures is probably going to get the burial that it deserves. That is, unless you guys spread it, like whispers in the Twitterverse. See, this idea that you can look at an organism's behavior and think about the things that it's trying to signal to other organisms in its social group for the purpose of attracting both mates and allies. We heard talk about this. Sexual selection is often also social selection. This is fairly cutting-edge biology. But personally, I just don't think this is going to be a new idea for rap artists. The idea that the arts and language and music and complex design displays, that those are mainly intended for attracting mates, I think that's what all rap music is pretty much already about, either implicitly or explicitly. I mean, rap is already a guide to evolution. See, I've been listening to hip-hop since I was 11, and I've been hearing this message from hip-hop culture my entire life that the arts are an aphrodisiac. The first time I heard it, I was 11 years old, and it was coming from Slick Rick.
Ricky, can't you see? Somehow your words just hypnotize me.
So, Slick Rick is observing that his words have a hypnotic effect on female brains. A peacock could have written that song. Then, a few years later, I heard that exact same message, but this time it had mutated, and it was coming from Snoop Doggy Dogg.
Doggy, can't you see? Somehow your words just hypnotize me.
Then, a few years later, when I was 18, I heard the exact same message a third time, only this time it had mutated further. Oh, I forgot to show you Snoop. There it is. Only this time it had mutated further, and it was coming from the pinnacle of aphrodisiac evolution in rap. I think you guys know what I mean, right? It's the notorious B.I.G. Yeah, gangster rap is sexy, admit it, what? See, I can fill you with real scientific lyrics, but I confess, my mind is twisted, cause I've been listening to Kanye, Nas, and Jay, while reading Richard Dawkins on the opposite page, so now this whole rap thing seems awfully strange. Talk about he got fame, and he's not real, and he's got chains, but wait, that's a peacock's tail, cause you never hear them say they got it cheap on sale, which means that bling is meant to represent how much they really spent, and at the end of the day, well, that's the definition of a fitness display, like a bowerbird's nest, which takes hours of work and makes the females catch a powerful urge, just like a style of verse or an amazing flow. But it takes dedication and it takes a toll, cause the best displays are unfakeable. Baba, 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 can't you see? Sometimes your words just hypnotize me, and I just love your turns up phrase, so even though you're still broke, I love you anyway. Baba, 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 can't you see? Sometimes your words just hypnotize me, and I just love your turns up phrase, so even though you're still broke, I love you anyway. You will never listen to rap music the same way again. What I'm saying is, when I listen to that song, Hypnotized by B.I.G., came out in the early 90s, I hear a parable. Not a biblical parable, clearly. It's a Darwinian parable, because the song contains information about how evolution works. Turns out literature is full of these parables. Literature, if it's the product of evolved human minds, must be like a map to human nature, telling us what people care about. Now, my favorite example of a Darwinian parable is not from the anthology of Biggie Smalls, because I'm not a modernist. I prefer the classical period. My favorite example is from the ancient Greek playwright Aristophanes, who over 2,400 years ago wrote a play called Lysistrata that is still relevant today. Now, in the play Lysistrata, the Greek women decide that they are sick and tired of all this violent male status competition, all this aggression, all this swagger. They call it the Peloponnesian Wars. So the women decide that they're going to conspire together to completely refrain from sex in any form until the men agree to call a truce in the war. They stage a sex strike. This works every time. They did it in Liberia, too. Ended the war, won a Nobel Peace Prize. Of course, what happened in Lysistrata is the men, they hate this idea, right? They try to bargain, and argue, and complain, and all these wars are really important and all that. And eventually, they just give in, and there's peace in the land. Can't you see what this is? This is Darwin's theory of sexual selection applied as a peacemaking force politically. This is a potentially global peace initiative that should have its own department at the UN. It would work better than all this talking shit out stuff we do because it comes from somewhere deeper. It's based on one of the most powerful forces that evolution has ever produced. I'm talking specifically about female mate choice. It's asymmetrical. That's been the theme of the day, right? Male mate choice matters. It just matters less. It's female mate choice that created the peacock's tail. And it's female mate choice that inspires the majority of male-on-male violence in nature. Ladies, with great power comes great responsibility. So, here's where the show gets overtly political. I'm trying to start a movement with the Rap Guide to Evolution, and I'm hoping everyone in the room tonight is gonna sign on to the revolution, all right? I want you guys all to join me with this. It's kind of like a marching song to rally the soldiers of sexual selection. I hope you guys are gonna come with me on this one. The song is called Don't Sleep with Mean People. Hey, we gotta do this! We're rally the troops and shit! Come on, everybody with me! Don't sleep with mean people! That's the anthem, please! Think about your granddaughters and grandsons! Don't sleep with mean people! Pretty and handsome? Mean people hold the gene pool for ransom. So what if we really did it? This silly business, use sex appeal to make a real difference, like a field mission, to seek and enjoy. It's gotta be the most powerful tool that we can employ. We don't need Freud. Darwin has the answers. Sexual selection can enhance us. Let's make a competition out of altruism. If someone gives enough to charity, you better frolic with them. Generosity should be rewarded and celibacy enforced for those who try to keep it hoarded. Of course, I'm speaking mostly to women, because when it comes to reproduction, you control the system. Men have a supporting role to play, but where you lead, best believe we'll follow with no complaint. It's time for a gender-based intifada. Aristophanes got it right with Lysistrata. More than 2 millennia ago, the women in the know realized that it's a lie that men are in control. So ladies, please, every time you fornicate, just keep in mind, the future is yours to take. So don't sleep with mean people, that's the anthem, please. Think about your granddaughters and grandsons. Don't sleep with mean people, pretty and handsome. Mean people hold the gene pool for ransom. Don't sleep with mean people, that's the anthem, please. Think about your granddaughters and grandsons. Don't sleep with mean people, pretty and handsome. If you want to take the pledge, get your hands up. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, get your hands up. Join the revolution. I want this shit on billboards and bumper stickers and on TV, right? When I say don't sleep with, you guys say, mean people. Come on, don't sleep with. Mean people. Say it, don't sleep with. Mean people. Who are you not going to sleep with? Mean people. Just the ladies, don't sleep with. Mean people. Do we have any questions? You know, what you hit on there is a deeper evolutionary truth, which is that a song called Don't Sleep With Mean People wouldn't be necessary if women weren't attracted to bad boys in the first place, right? And Rihanna and Chris Brown is kind of a good example of that in today's culture. But there's a perfectly plausible evolutionary reason why aggression and violence should be attractive, especially to women of a certain age. You notice a 15-year-old is way more likely to like a bad boy biker type that's always peacocking compared to a 45-year-old woman, right? And it's because life cycle phenomena. You don't know how long you're going to live until you live that long. So hedging towards aggression makes more sense when you're younger than when it does when you're older. And our ancestral environments have contained times where only the bad boys lived and reproduced, and all the nice guys had their throats cut in the ditch by Genghis Khan, right? So it would breed into us a preference for that, but more so at some ages than others, and more so in certain social contexts than others. So I think this is not something I'm making up. It's already happening. Humans are becoming gracilized over the years. Just trying to speed the process up a little bit. Yes?
Yeah, all other male primates have deadly canine teeth in their mouth. So the process you described is already going on, and the fact that our human males don't have deadly weapons in their mouth is an indication that you're exactly correct.
For sure. Many women are very sensible and already don't sleep with mean people. But if we were consistent in that initiative, we would have a far less violent world. And yeah, there is physiological evidence that that's happening, but there is also physiological evidence that the process is not complete, because we're still highly sexually dimorphic physically, less so than some of our close cousin species, but there's no reason for male upper body strength except to fight other males. And we still have that as a heritage, or hand grip, or lots of other things. So, it's happening. It's just, if we have a future where violence resolves conflicts less and less, we can look forward to a future where people have instincts towards violence less and less. But people can make conscientious efforts to speed that up in the same kind of way as we can artificially select farm animals. Basically, we're already selecting each other. So, give it a push. Yeah.
Have you put the Mean People song and accompanying talk on YouTube so it can go viral?
Yeah, I actually did this at a TED Talk, TEDx East, just about a year ago. So if you look at TEDx East and search my name, then you'll find "Don't Sleep with Mean People" as the anthem, and you can see all the TED heads getting their hands up and waving it back and forth as well. So I have a short 3-minute encore piece. I'm gonna call it there, but for time. Let's drop that beat. See, when I first started writing these evolution raps a couple of years ago, early drafts of my lyrics were super simplistic. They went like this. Yo, yo, the origin of species ain't no feces, dog, believe me. That's all I could think of. So then I was like, oh shit, this really needs to be rewritten. And sometimes people ask me, okay, well, how does your show get written? Like this. Performance, feedback, revision. And how do I generally develop my lyricism? Like this. Performance, feedback, revision. And how do human beings ever learn to do anything? Like this. Performance, feedback, revision. And evolution is really just kind of an algorithm that goes like this. Performance, feedback, revision. So the genetic code of every living creature was also kind of written like this. Performance, feedback, revision. See, the genes are like a text with 100,000 pages, and the revisions occur in the little random changes that come from mutations. And then when they see the light, well, that's the performance. That's the phenotype. Natural selection, well, that's the feedback side. That's about who survives and whose genes can't rise in the next generation. Yes, what I'm saying is that a rap performance like this is the best illustration for the way that dissent with modification works. Because the performance is necessary to change the words, to decide which have an impact and which to send back to the drawing board. In fact, I just did that when you guys failed to react. Because any line can change, and the mutations occur when I improvise on stage. Because up until this moment, everything I said was off the page. But now I'm going to have to switch it up. I'll do a little freestyle section. I'll keep it really specific so I can beat your key to detection. Alright, this is how I improvise. I'm being creative with my flow. Yes, please spread my video. Make it go viral. Yeah, that's how I want it to go. That's my attitude. And where's the last speaker? Build me some Bjork style attitude. I got some great songs on my album. You better check them out. Yeah, kinda new to you guys, but I got like 7 records out. That's the way that I rock it. This is freestyle. I'm talking words. I think we should give it up for the host of the day, David Rothenberg. Indeed. Yeah, this is the way that I drop this. If my virus infects your mind, it goes into loop and I pause this. Just like viral in the Bjork act. Yeah, I gotta spark that. This is the way that I chill my whole life until I take a dirt nap. See, even if I make a little mistake over the rhythm, that's okay. That's how I introduce randomness into the system. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take it from now straight to the blinking cannibals from the Pleistocene. Shout out to thinking animals. Yeah, we got organizations in the house that need repping too. See, this is a portal in my brain right now that I'm stepping through. It's instantaneous evolution. Using rap music to try to lower violence in the world and maybe actually affect the revolution. Yeah, that's right. And plus, I want to see David Abrams do his magic show. I think John Ronson wrote about it in The Man Who Stared at Crows. I've been seeing themes all day long. I've been remixing, twisting. This is where I try to use evolution to explore differences. It's survival of the beautiful. I'm hoping that you can realize something can both be beautiful and useful. It's not necessarily incompatible. This is my rapping flow. I'm gonna feel it right down to the soles of my feet. Right now I'm freestyling from my clavicle. I might go through all the bones. E-bones connected to them. That's a bad idea. This is the way that I push it right here. See, this is the way that I stare out at the crowd right now, but I can't see it. Why? Because I'm flipping the rhyme. But I'm blind because I've had this freaking projector in my eye. But just here, this is my concept. This is my little system. It goes like this. Performance, feedback, revision. And everybody here can use this concept to help their lives and learn how to do anything. So say it with me. Performance, feedback, revision. Memorize it. Performance, feedback, revision. Recite along. Performance, feedback, revision. Wait, one more time. Performance, feedback, revision. You got it.
The Rap Guide to Evolution. Obviously a good idea. First he did the Rap Guide to the Canterbury Tales. Perhaps less obviously a good idea, but still a good idea. Imagine the challenges of taking all this science we've heard, all this philosophy, and trying to turn it into a super fast talking musical medium to communicate to the masses of the world. Here it is. Are we almost ready? Baba Brinkman.
The first man on this planet to translate his amazement. That was the cue for the sound right there. Track 1. The first man on this planet to translate his amazement at the wonder of life into a way to explain it was Charles Darwin peas. But don't call it sellout, please. Those black-eyed peas have a lot of mouths to feed. Their wild cousins, well, they just watch from the weeds. See, there is nothing artificial about domestication. Ant colonies keep domestic aphids. It's an arrangement where one hand watches the other. We protect the cow, and the cow offers the udder. And that's how we get a mouthful of butter. But in the wild, that cow is not going to cut it. But think about it for a second. If our little selections and little preferences can change and enhance all the critical differences between wild and domestic breeds over the centuries, well, maybe that can explain Darwin. So this is a celebration of Darwin's greatness in the form of a rap. Some would say a debasement. I would say be patient. Okay, so how do you go from amoebas to rappers? You open the origin of species and you read its chapters. You're going to learn all about the impact of people's actions on farm animals, ducks, cows, dogs, domestic crops. They had wild ancestors, but somehow they went soft, kind of like underground rappers going pop. Like, for instance, in West Africa around 7000 BC, humans first domesticated black-eyed everything. In nature, instead of us making selections, it's just survival and reproduction in the midst of competition, where slight differences that arise randomly get selected by the pressures applied environmentally, and eventually species divide like a family tree into everything alive, from a tiny fly to a huge manatee to humanity. So how does this apply to the craft of the MC? Well, they say evolution is an algorithm. It's like an equation. It only has 3 parts: variation, selection, and heritability. So let's see if we can find all 3 in that ecosystem called rap music. All right, variation can be found